Welcome to today's Hemp Barons podcast, everyone. I'm host Joy Beckerman, and very proud and happy to deliver to you part 3 of our 3-part series with Michael Krawitz and Kenzi Riboulet on the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs and the international roots of cannabis prohibition in all of its forms: industrial hemp, medical and adult use cannabis, as well as cannabis and sustainable development, paving the way for the next decade in cannabis and hemp policy. I want to talk this week as we move full speed ahead into the presidential election for 2020. Also, the census collection of 2020 is wrapping up, and the census is really important. I want to make sure we all understand what it is. The census is based in the U.S. Constitution, which explicitly states that the census is intended to count every person living in the United States, both citizens and non-citizens alike. What's at stake? Why do we collect this information every 10 years? So we haven't done this since 2010, is $800 billion in federal funding. That's what's in stake. The census count determines how different resources are allocated for schools, for healthcare, for other essential programs. And the more people counted in our communities, the more funding for these community services we receive. So when we respond to the census, we're helping to make sure that our family, that our neighbors, that our communities get their fair share of the funding for these services, but also that we get appropriate political representation. So results from the 2020 census actually are also used to determine the number of seats that each state has in Congress and our political representation really at all levels of government. It's so important to be counted. Again, citizens and non-citizens alike. And right now, because of COVID, the data collection has been expanded, and the Census Bureau are looking for all of their offices to complete their work by September 30th. So there's still time. Now, it's really quick and easy to fill out the census if you haven't responded yet. So filling out the census is very quick and easy. It takes about 10 minutes. You just go to 2020census.gov. Once again, that's 2020census.gov. You may hear people the same way that they have naysayers out there and apathy around voting. You may hear the same thing around the census. Don't listen to apathy. Don't listen to conspiracy theories. Don't listen to disinformation campaigns telling you to be afraid to fill out the census or telling you that it's a waste of time. It asks basic questions about each person who lives in your household. It asks for their age, their name, their race, their ethnicity, but it's not going to ask about immigration status. It's not going to ask if you're a U.S. citizen. And despite this, many segments of various minority populations are still afraid to participate in the census. If they're refugees or immigrants or undocumented, they have a deportation order or they're a non-citizen, but we need to make sure that you're counted. Those census responses are totally confidential. They're protected by extremely strong laws, and the Census Bureau isn't allowed to share individual responses with anyone, including immigration enforcement or other government agencies. The Census Bureau cannot use your census response for any purpose other than statistical analysis, and a violation of those laws can result in up to $250,000 in penalties and 5 years in prison. So please, if you have not filled out the census, don't be afraid. Go to 2020census.gov, fill it out, be counted, and make sure that your community and your family are getting their fair share of funding for services and political representation at all levels. Now, without further ado, let me bring to you part 3 in our 3-part series from international cannabis heroes and sustainability heroes, Michael Krawitz and Kenzi Riboulet. Until next time, everyone, stay healthy, get out there, fill out your census, and register to vote. Well, this is wonderful. Welcome back again for the 3rd part of our 3-part series with Michael Krawitz and Kenzi Riboulet on the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. Thank you so much for being with me again today, Michael and Kenzi.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to be here.
And today we will focus on what is really near and dear to our hearts beyond the liberation of the plant, which I know is just life's work and life purpose for the three of us. But how can we heal the planet through this plant that is here to serve all of humanity's needs? And as many listeners have heard me say multiple times, we are talking about human and animal nutrition, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, sacramental purposes, body care, textiles, building materials, paper, industrial sealants and coatings, energy, fuel, batteries, nanotechnology, biomedical applications. Somebody stomp me. The cannabis plant in all of its forms is here to heal the needs and serve the needs of humanity and animals and the planet. And of course, as you well know for being contributors and authors yourself, the book Cannabis and Sustainable Development, Paving the Way for the Next Decade in Cannabis Hemp Policy has been birthed into the world thanks to FOD and many other international heroes across the world and heroines, including you folks. Michael, let's start with how is cannabis part of sustainable development?
Well, gosh, I think first I'll just make a comment, maybe a sort of a half joke that I was thinking, oh, Joy's listing off the uses of hemp. I get a break. I can go take a walk, go hang out in the park for a while and come back because, you and I both know to actually do an exhaustive list of the uses for hemp, that would be its own show. That would be a whole hour. So 2 shows, that would be 2 whole shows. So I think that is a key thing that we as the cannabis movement have understood for a very long time, that cannabis holds the keys to solve some of the world's biggest problems. I mean, Jack Herer, hemp can save the earth. That was kind of the mantra of our movement, for good reason, because growing cannabis hemp instead of cutting down the world's forests seems like a much better direction to go in. A renewable energy crop, a crop that can be used for developing jobs and meaningful lifestyles, but also the product of the plant. And that's why you have such great benefit to people, is because the plant is so useful and serves so many functions. So really, we're talking about kind of our collective wisdom, something that our cannabis movement has known for a long time, that cannabis can help in environmental issues, that cannabis can help create good jobs, cannabis can help end some of the international issues of smuggling and whatnot by, through better law and regulation. So we've understood these things for a long time. And I think this is just our first effort to really put this into words and put it into a process. And we're happy that we have a process that we can plug into.
It's amazing that we're talking about a plant that is the source for growing the most fiber per acre of any crop. And when we put it even against, say, cotton, a very popular crop for textiles, cotton is short, inferior. It takes a lot of water. It takes a lot of pesticides. It's actually responsible for more than 50% of the pesticide use on the planet annually, only to produce a short, inferior material that is not going to last as long as a hemp textile garment, and that does not have many of the properties that the unique cellulosic makeup of hemp fiber has. So, and that is just one of so many examples that we'll probably discuss throughout this interview. How about you, Kenzi? What would you like to add as we move forward and explore all of these different ways that hemp and cannabis in all of its forms protects and heals the planet and the environment?
Well, there is this other part of another important part of the report, Cannabis and Sustainable Development. It's actually related to cannabis, although not directly cannabis. It's prohibition, and prohibition is actually acting the exact opposite of sustainable development and severely provoking harm in all aspects of society. So prohibition forces in developing countries, forces growers to go into more remote areas, which are often protected areas of reserves of biodiversity, but also forces people to work in terrible labor conditions, and that's prohibition, and that's directly a huge obstacle to trying to reach these goals of sustainable development. Prohibition also made people that grow cannabis in their home start to grow indoors instead of growing on their balcony or in the garden of their grandmother or whatever, because of prohibition, because of repression. And growing indoors is one of the worst way to grow a plant, because it provokes more harms than the actual benefit that the plant will generate. So prohibition has sort of balanced the cannabis plant in a way that if we sort of consider it today, cannabis in the context of prohibition, it might be that the benefit for sustainable development is almost neutral, or almost maybe a bit negative, because of prohibition, because of how prohibition have forced the human beings, the communities, to interact with that plant, which is highly unsustainable. So that's maybe a sort of yin and yang view of the topic, but that's definitely, and I think the sustainable development, the goals, the approach, the agenda made by the UN, and all these sort of 17 goals, which approach from different perspectives, different topics, and so try to detail all of the issues of our world, basically our 21st century. That's a good way to approach this yin-yang cannabis and cannabis policies in particular, and see what can be good, what can be bad.
And I did just want to give the listeners sort of a real world American example of exactly what you just said. So we're talking some of the most beautiful mountains, right, and ranges and scenery in the world is in Northern California, the Emerald Triangle, Humboldt County. And we see guerrilla, growing there, not among the incredible sustainable hippies that have definitely been forced into all kinds of unjust situations as they try to deliver this plant during Prohibition to folks, but more of the guerrilla growers there that are up there in the mountains with generators and oil, and they just dump their chemicals, they dump their oil, leave their waste right there in the middle of nature in the mountains, and that again is just a good example of Prohibition and destroying the environment. And secondarily, although it's certainly a primary issue, is that as there are legal and regulatory frameworks being developed on a state-by-state level here in the United States, many states are only allowing the indoor cultivation of adult and medical cannabis. Washington State, where I live, does allow outdoor grows, and there's a whole movement for sun-grown cannabis, of course, but it is an environmental travesty, these gigantic facilities indoor to grow this beautiful plant that belongs outdoors in the sun.
Absolutely.
And please continue, Michael or Kenzi, as we continue to explore this issue. And I'm sorry to have cut you off there, Kenz.
Well, I'd like to give everyone a little bit of insight into what's changed. So something's changed in our world that gave us the, kind of motivation to come out with this report. And I want to kind of explore that for a second. So inside of the World Drug Program, as we talked about in a separate show, these drug treaties don't work like regular everyday treaties. They're not self-executing. There's no enforcement, blue hat enforcement of the treaties, and we're working in a world where it's all about metrics of success, really. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. And the metrics of success for the drug war have been political. It's been an ideological war for all our lifetimes, everyone alive, the whole 100-year war, going all the way back to like 1899 with the first treaty. And I think that what's happening and what has happened recently at the UN is really important, because what they've done is they've come up with these goals, as Kenzi described, 17 goals. And what they're designed to do is come up with real metrics of success. Your ideology may be good or be bad, but what is it doing that's good? Is it making people's lives safer? Are they in less poverty? Are they less subject to human rights abuse? Are they better able to find good, clean food and good energy, and are they able to have housing? These are all real world goals connected to real good outcomes for real people. And it's somewhat of a dialogue inside the United Nations system. that created this set of goals and a timeline, 2030. So this whole 10 years from 2020 to 2030 is the 10-year sustainable development window that the United Nations has opened. It's literally everywhere in the United Nations system. You can't go anywhere, any building, without seeing these big charts and graphs and posters. It's on every email, and it's really, the reason why I say that is because I want people to know how accessible this program is. And it gives you a window by which to enter into a dialogue at the world level to change the world. And if you really are earnestly interested in using hemp as a tool to help save the world, you really bought into what Jack was saying, this is the way to do it. And I think when our conversation with Steve D'Angelo a week or two ago about this really brought to my heart the opposite direction as well. This is a great report that you can bring into your legislator. You can bring it to your family dinner. You can bring it to your family gatherings. You can bring it to your legislative offices and your hearings, and work from it, and give yourself the authority of speaking with a much louder voice, and use this as the roadmap that it is. And I'll let Kenzi kind of describe how this is a roadmap.
Yeah, because I mean, as you say, it's interesting indeed. It's 2015, 2016, and that also links with the discussion we had in the previous parts. In 2015, the UN adopts these goals, 17 goals for sustainable development, that are really quite well known, probably not that much inside of the US, but outside of the US, really sort of popularly well known and used by a lot of civil society organizations, even companies, to show social responsibility, etc. And the UN come up with that in 2015, and in 2016, 1 year after, they adopt this UNGAS document, which is a major plan for drug policies in the world for the next 10 or 20 years. And this is 1 year after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Agenda, and they come up with a plan which, unless everything we had in the past, which was just demand reduction, supply reduction, and cooperation. So it's like repression of use, repression of traffic, and the cooperation to make more repression. And after the SDG, they realized, well, now the UN has an approach that is comprehensive and that is progressive on almost all aspects of our society, including environmental issues, social justice, gender equality, etc., etc. So we can't just continue adopting a plan on drugs that is totally separated from that and not related. And so they adopted this UNGAS, which is kind of cool, and which also puts the drug policies are absolutely embedded into the sustainable development. They are mutually reinforcing, and they are critical. It's critical to take into consideration sustainable development for international drug policies. So we say that's a great thing to say. Let us show you how to do it concretely, and that's why we did this report also, in a way. So it's also a dialogue between the world cannabis communities, because really people from all continents have taken part into this report. Dialogue between all of these people, all of us, and the United Nations, which is just not a bunch of bureaucrats, but which is all the governments of the countries of the world that meet there. The report was distributed in hard copies, almost 5,000 copies at the United Nations, to all countries, all delegations, all the experts in public health, in security, law enforcement, etc., coming to the annual meeting on drug policy. So it's really a landmark moment of discussion between the cannabis communities and the community of prohibition, in a way, because prohibition comes from there.
When I have done so much lobbying and advocacy over the years and continue, it's the most important thing we do. It's what we do, guys, right? You guys are just the heroes and heroines of the world doing it at the international level. And I have created binders with tabs. My profession, in addition to hemp law and policy compliance and expert testimony, has been in complex litigation and compliance. And so creating binders that are highly organized with tabs for busy lawyers and busy judges is something that I'm very good at it. And I have been preparing those for various legislators, and I know how much they appreciate it and how much work goes into that. You sat there and with this incredible team, made an entire book. Here it all is in one book. Let us distribute them, which was not only just a tremendous amount of countless, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of time and expertise that went into drafting it, but of course, the fundraising that went into publishing it, distributing it, getting your traveling arrangements so that you could actually get it into the hands of the most important people who need to have this information, and that is the decision makers at the UN and World Health Organization level. This is tremendous. And I treasure my copy.
We should tell a funny story from that. I mean, at least one. Many come to mind, but one of them is this book is actually printed fairly inexpensively. We printed it in the Czech Republic, and it turned out to be pretty heavy. It's ironic. It's like food, maybe. Cheaper food is more fattening, or I don't know why. It's a strange universe, right? So we have this cheaper book and it's heavier, and we had several thousand copies we brought to the United Nations. And as grassroots as we are, we brought them basically right through the front door, moved them down the hallway, and put them in the NGO lounge and started distributing them. And really we weren't thinking about the chunk of space that we were taking up in the NGO lounge. Due to many circumstances that year, kind of off the hook year, there was a need for clarifying the rules of engagement at the United Nations. And the NGO committee actually created a rule saying that you couldn't put big stacks of books in the corner of the NGO lounge because of our sustainable development book.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. And so the listeners know, NGO, of course, is non-governmental organizations. And there is an NGO lounge within the United Nations conferencing centers there, and it sounds like you folks took up a book.
We kind of took it over, yeah. We kind of took it over.
Oftentimes around us cannabis activists, rules are made. What can we say? We will push it and get our message out until someone says, okay, you have to get it out a different way. We adapt, like permaculture, advocacy permaculture, man.
That's it, exactly.
So please continue. I want to make sure that while we have you, and of course, all the way from the mountains of Virginia and the beautiful lands of Barcelona, we've got you today, and for a third time. So I want to make sure we're getting out to our listeners everything that you think is important for them to know.
Wow, if we really need to do that, then it's not 3 episodes we have to do, but probably a couple more. But
some of the key points, and then certainly would love to talk about again these environmental benefits. But I want to make sure that from a law and policy level, your expertise, what is important to disseminate.
Yeah, well, I think what's really important to remember is that if you dig behind all of that, both prohibition, both cannabis policies per se, or the sustainable development agenda, what you find behind this is human rights. And it's maybe basic to say it, but it needs to be said. It's in the end all a question of human rights, be it the right of patients, the right also of physicians and doctors, the rights of farmers and small farmers, the rights of peasants. These are all human rights recognized internationally and in a series of countries. So they sort of already codify all of the best things to which we aspire, all of the hopes of the cannabis communities or the people involved or interested in cannabis policy and hemp policy reform and the normalization of hemp and cannabis in our societies. It's really a human rights issue, and it's probably human rights is probably the best tool to really understand the core topics, the core issues that we have to deal with.
How about just moving on to a very related subject? How about carbon sequestration, carbon footprint, the carbon conversation in general? Are either of you wanting to discuss that in terms of the book, in terms of national and international policy?
Yeah, that's something we recommend in the book, because indeed it's a good. It's been shown to be good to push towards more sustainable practices for businesses, and in particular in what concerns cultivation. We talked before about indoor cultivation. I think it's definitely something we have to, this kind of regulation that we need to consider to, since the cannabis industry is created from zero, they might have a tendency to reproduce what industries are doing, which is not necessarily exemplary. So since we have the opportunity to craft cannabis policies that are specific to cannabis, let's get inspired in policies that work for the protection of the environment and for sustainable development generally.
When we talk about deforestation, of course, we see all of these memes and T-shirts. Anything wood can do, hemp can do, or anything wood can do, hemp can do better. And with very, very few exception, that's absolutely true. Even going back to the 1960 research by a researcher, Leicester Dewey from the USDA, who planted his hemp fields right around Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. In fact, our understanding is that a portion of the Pentagon was plopped and built right on top of some of Leicester Dewey's hemp fields. But it was in that research way back in 1916 for the use of hemp herds, of course, the inner woody core of the hemp stalk, to be used in paper, that over a 20-year period, an acre of hemp will produce 20 times more. I'm sorry, going to do that one over, Dan, a little editing note. That over a 20-year period, an acre of hemp will produce 4 times more paper than trees. And that is, of course, because it takes about 20 years to grow a tree that could then be harvested and its pulp used for paper. And over that same 20-year period, that acre of hemp will be grown and harvested several times. But I think on top of that, what's very important to know, of course, is that lignin is what gives plants its rigidity, right? If you're going to punch a tree, you're going to hurt your hand. It's filled with lignin. That's a very hard plant, versus the amount of lignin in the hemp plant. And so we don't need to use we hardly need to use as many chemicals at all to break down that cellulose to make a hemp pulp for paper, versus the chemicals that it takes to break down the wood cellulose for paper. Secondarily, when you break down the wood pulp, you've now got this dark, because of all of the lignin pulp, that then needs to be bleached. And then that requires dioxin, which we have been poisoning the water tables with for decades and decades. We do not need to bleach hemp pulp. We can all just get used to a nice creamy colored paper. We don't need bleached white paper. So, and that is just one product, but it's one product that we use universally. And I know there's, of course, huge reductions in paper use with the advent of electronic mail and electronic document signing, et cetera, but we still use a ton of paper. And that is just one of many products, of course, that if we switch over to recycled materials and blending hemp with it for for paper, will have just a significant impact, that alone, on the environment. Just one example.
Also, absolutely, and it's also an impact for farmers, because when you grow trees, you can't necessarily produce with the same crop medicine and use all the wastes from the trees to do other kinds of product, which is the case with hemp. So the multi-purpose aspect of the crop is also absolutely critical for both the environment and the reduction of the overall impact of our production on the environment, because with the same impact, the same crop, you can obtain different products instead of with different crops, but also the social impact on farmers, which is incredible. The fact that you have different sources of revenue which fluctuate differently, which ensure you more stability, it's definitely something that we should
and leave the trees where they are. And meanwhile, while the hemp is growing, it is, of course, capturing and sequestering carbon. Michael, it sounded like you were excited to say something.
Well, I just wanted to kind of give a little context. I don't want to give people too much homework, so I'm not going to ask everyone to read it's over 100-page book, but I will ask everyone to at least read the goals, the 17 goals that the UN has put forward. And just for an example, 12, 13, and 15 are responsible consumption and production, combat climate change and its impacts, and ecosystems of life and land. And the reason why I read those three, under this heading of carbon, is because I want to point out how these singular issues for us actually cross over with many of the different goals within the Sustainable Development Goals. And the work that we've been doing out there in the field is so applicable and is so helpful to this process. But I also want to point out that I really have a special connection to Lister Dewey. If you remember, I'm the guy that brokered the deal that brought in his diaries and brought them into our movement to be reviewed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
I was actually the guy that was responsible for the Washington Post article that broke the story about the Pentagon being on a hemp field. So and I love that connection. It's a beautiful thing. So anyway. At that same time, around 1900, 1920, was our first drug laws in the United States. And it was about the time, I imagine, when we really started getting most involved in the UN treaty system. And the reason why I point that out is because these Sustainable Development Goals kind of go, there's sort of two different, it's a bridge and then a new world. So the bridge is getting out of prohibition. This prohibition was set up as part of colonialism. And those colonial lines break down right on weed, right in a weed field. And essentially some of our best cannabis on earth, subjectively, for medicine, for recreation, for spiritual use, etc., is on some small crops of land, like you said already, in Humboldt, but also in beautiful places all over the earth that all seem to be little niche places. They're not in the middle of the downtown area. They're out there in the country, in places all over the earth, owned by little people, by small farmers, by indigenous people, by traditional medicine healers. And these colonial lines have created the playground that now these big industries are taking advantage of and growing huge amounts of weed indoors and stuff like that. They'd never be able to compete with cannabis grown in a developing country. And we need to retool everything. Our crop replacement, in the drug war, we need to be using cannabis as the crop that replaces. Instead of replacing cannabis, we should be using cannabis to replace other crops. Instead of growing poppy, grow cannabis, etc. And I think that we need to be looking at cannabis as a healing crop for the nations hurt by colonialism, and recognize that colonialism is not over, that these effects still go on today. And little countries without a whole lot of political clout, that lack that geopolitical power, don't feel free to grow cannabis the same way Canada might, or the United States might, or even countries in the Americas like Uruguay might. So we're working with countries like Thailand that have a real burgeoning cannabis crop that they want to put out there. We want to be able to have an equal playing field worldwide. And I think using these cannabis and sustainable development as a guide, we can retool the entire system. The treaty needs to be rewritten, but the whole system needs to be rewritten in a way that protects the little guy, our friend in the cannabis world.
We are talking reform at such high levels, and how it even trickles down, even beyond colonialism, which it's sort of what would I say, a compounding factor as states liberate the plant. For example, Georgia. So the governor of Georgia just passed an amended or new law in Georgia, which increases the processing for hemp fee in that state. It was $10,000 for a processing license last year, which was already just astronomical and obviously cost prohibitive for smaller players. But this new law increased it to $50,000. So now a hemp processing license in Georgia is $50,000. Why? Because there was no fiscal note, no appropriations afforded to the hemp plan. And that's happening. A lot of these hemp production and hemp processing laws are being passed in states, but they're only being passed. There's general support, bipartisan support. Generally, everyone, you don't have to prove to many states other than, let's say, Idaho, Iowa, South Dakota, and Mississippi, of the value and safety of this crop. Most of them are totally on board, but they don't know how to pay for the program in their state. And so in order order to get the law passed, they say, oh, the fiscal note is zero, and they don't apply a budget to actually be able to administer or carry out the plan. And so George's idea was, well, we don't have any money, so I guess we'll charge $50,000 for each hemp processing license. I mean, clearly there is, a combination of interests happening when these types of ridiculous laws and fees are put forth. And I also just following up on our sort of exponential impact of just replacing hemp with replacing paper with hemp and other recycled fibers and other fibers. Hemp is a great blender. We don't need 100% hemp everything. Hemp is a wonderful blender in these different pulps. But how that even continues, of course, you're letting the tree stand, but it's recyclable about 100 more times than tree paper. It can be made acid-free, which means it lasts longer. And then, of course, the biodegradability in general of products that are responsibly manufactured using hemp. We can still make products that are not biodegradable, although they have some hemp in them. And we're glad that there's going to be hemp in them as opposed to more caustic chemicals. So not everything is biodegradable just because it has hemp in it, but certainly it increases the ability for these products of every kind to be biodegradable. And of course, touching on some of the other planetary aspects, because it's an important thing for us to address in this particular episode, is phytoremediation. Of course, the plant uptakes heavy metals and other contaminants. Lots of research going on around that. There's even some research studies going on where they are uptaking nickel into the plant and then extracting the nickel out of the grown plant. We're discovering, of course, we're another source for bees, for pollinators. So just when other sources of pollen have already died, all of a sudden hemp's pollen becomes available, a new source at a critical time for pollinators. We can certainly go into breaking the pest cycle for regenerative, sustainable farming techniques when those are employed. And I think that's very important for folks to understand that certainly regular old commercial, conventional hemp farming techniques can be used on hemp, but you're going to kill your soil, salinate it, and not have as robust a crop as if you were employing responsible agronomic and regenerative techniques, which would help break the pest cycle in your rotation crop, which would help reduce the need for pesticides as well as herbicides. And then hemp is a hungry crop, depending on how healthy your soil is. I know we used to yell from the rooftops, it doesn't take any inputs back in the 90s. It doesn't take any water. It's a miracle plant. It grows anywhere. But of course, if you are growing for agricultural, commercial purposes, you're going to feed your crop. And depending where you are, that plant may need 18 inches of water. And they're doing research up in Canada. They're up to 200 pounds of nitrogen per hectare and still haven't met maximum yield. But then there's wonderful quality in Holland, quality soil in Holland, where they're not having to add those inputs and are getting some tremendous yield. So lots of research still needing to go on, but we're talking about a plant that just has tremendous benefits here. And before we close, I want to give each of you gentlemen an opportunity to say something that you want to make sure is said if it hasn't been done already.
No, I think you made a perfect overview, and you made an overview almost of all the goals in your speech just now. And maybe I want to close by saying that all of this indeed is possible only if hemp and cannabis generally are applied laws that are reasonable and that are coherent. And that's goal 16 of the Sustainable Development Agenda. That says policy coherence and harmonization of policy, and red tape and overburdensome regulations on hemp, just like the example you gave, are definitely not going to make all of this potential unfold, and that's really not sustainable. So goal 16 and coherence, harmonization, and normalization are critical and are maybe the first step to allow all the other goals to be met by this wonderful plant.
Common sense. We're just asking for common sense, data, scientifically driven law and policy. And all of that points to liberate this plant, make it easy for farmers to grow, make it easy for people to process, make make quality assured products from and get them out to the consumer and get hemp in every room in your house. I mean, that's really the bottom line. And how about you, Michael? Anything you want to leave the listeners with, sir?
So I was thinking, I don't know why this jumped in my mind, but I'm going to close with an introduction to the audience to a little bird. And the little bird's name is Cannabina linnet. And Cannabina linnet translates roughly to the little cannabis finch. And the reason that I say I found a Audubon print, over 100 years old, hand-colored print from a big Audubon book. They used to publish these books of prints of all these beautiful birds. And there's the Cannabina linnet standing on a cannabis plant, on the leaf, on the arm of the plant with the leaves there. And it's just the most beautiful thing. And I don't think you have to explain to anyone why our world is an integral part of the solution towards sustainable development when they realize that we've got a little finch named after our plant. So I think I'll leave you with that. And for those that want to find the report, it's really easy to find. Get out on the web, just type in cannabis and sustainable development, Kenzi Riboulet, and you'll pull right up the copy there on I think ResearchGate is one of the easiest places to find it. But if you have any trouble, certainly find us. We're easy to find. Go to the cannabis movement and ask for Mike or Kenzi.
Truly. You brothers and so many sisters I know who work with you are such my heroes. We are forever in your debt as we trudge through our state, local, and national halls of Congress and legislature. We know that you are working your butts off at the international level to really break free for all of us the root of the laws that we are suffering from and that cannabis suffers from throughout the planet. And we're making such tremendous progress. Words really don't express the depth of gratitude. Thank you, my brothers. I stand in solidarity with you, and I'm so grateful for the work that you do. Thank you for being with us on Hemp Barons for this 3-part series.
Thanks for having us.
It was great.
Thanks, guys.